could take a seat. Thank you. Yeah, I should say that again. Good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
A little louder, Felnnaugh. Oh, welcome, and thanks for coming out on such a cold and sunny day. I would like to point out that we have 295 people registered on Zoom, so there will be times that you can ask questions during this program today, but we want to make sure we're just about to get extra microphones out so that we can have the folks online hear the questions that are happening in the room. So my name is Cynthia Jones. I am the program chair for the Ninth Judicial Circuit Historical Society. We call it the NJCHS. And I'm also involved in our local M3 FBA, our M. Margaret McKeown Federal Bar Association. And I'm a past president there. I am so pleased that we have our Black History Month today and our honored guests, but we have a few introductions from some of our co-sponsors. So I would like to start with our co-sponsor, the court itself, and bring up Judge Tana Lynn. Judge Lynn.
Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to the court and our program. Judge Esteemed sends his apologies. He's in a multi-day evidentiary hearing, otherwise he would be here. But as I was thinking about the brief welcome remarks I would give today, this made me think about why learning about all of our history is so important. And I mean in the broadest sense of the word, every single person in this room, every single person online. And because I'm all about efficiency, I know we're all busy, and we want to get to the program, I asked a neutral source, what are the top 5 reasons to study history? And ChatGPT's answer was, number 1, understanding the present. History helps explain how the world got to where it is today. By studying past events, we gain insight into current social, political, and economic systems. Second, learning from mistakes. By reflecting on past errors and failures, whether in governance, conflicts, or human rights, we can avoid making the same mistakes again. Third, understanding human behavior. History offers patterns in human actions and decisions, giving us a better understanding of how people react in various situations. This can help with decision-making and conflict resolution in the present. Fourth, promoting empathy and tolerance. Learning about the struggles and experiences of different cultures and people throughout history fosters empathy, helping us appreciate diverse perspectives and reduce prejudice. And fifth, inspiring change. Stories of resilience, innovation, and social progress in history inspire us to strive for improvement in our own time, whether in social justice, scientific achievement, or other fields. I thought it did a pretty good job in speaking about stories of resilience and inspiration. I'm sure our speakers here today are going to give us a lot of that. So let's get started with the program. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Judge Lynn. My name is Johanna Hartwig, and I am the Executive Director of the Ninth Judicial Circuit Historical Society. And we are so pleased to be co-sponsoring this event with the M. Margaret McKeown FBA here in Seattle, which is a truly wonderful organization that is just a volcano of amazing programming, including this. I know what will be a very inspiring start to Black History Month. We are so pleased to be able to be sharing with everyone here in the room and also with our almost 300 registrants across the Ninth Circuit, the very engaging narratives I know we are going to hear from Judge Jones and from our Ninth Circuit Judge, Johnnie Rawlinson. So if you aren't familiar with the Ninth Judicial Circuit Historical Society, bit of a mouthful, but you can find us at njchs.org. Sign up for our newsletter. We do 3 things. We do programs like this wonderful program. We have a really interesting law journal called Western Legal History, and we collect and publicize oral histories of judges and prominent attorneys across the circuit. So we welcome you to check out the organization. I have a technical note for the folks who are joining us streaming. Apologies, we had a little bit of a technical issue this morning. Needed to change the Zoom link, And you might see that many of you have been renamed in honor of our wonderful program associate and the other employee of our nonprofit, Georgia Johnson. So you might see that Georgia is very well represented here. What we would like for you to do is, if you are seeking Washington State CLE, which is kindly being offered free for this program, that is the only CLE that is being offered, please chat your name in the chat. It will just go to Georgia, and just put your name and your Washington Bar Association CLE, I'm sorry, your Washington Bar Association number. If you have some problem with that during the program, feel free to reach out to the hosts afterwards and we will handle it for you. But if you can do it then we'll make sure that we get your CLE to you. Okay, thank you very much. I'm looking forward to this program.
Hi everyone, my name is Mike Wampold. I'm the current president of the M3 Bar Association. Thank you all so much for coming. Obviously, history is always important, but at this point in our country's history becomes very important. And so we're very appreciative first to Judge Rawlinson for coming all the way from Nevada and braving our weather to do this. We really are appreciative of you being here for this important program. Also want to thank Cynthia Jones for putting this on. This doesn't happen, but for Cynthia Jones, who's put this on, helped put it on for many years. And this is an important program, Black History program that we've put on for many years. And we've got some additional programming about history coming up, women's history and Jewish history, both coming up. So please look out for those programs. And before I sit down and let the program get started, I also want to just thank Tony Duck. Is Tony here? Tony is the reason that you can hear me and that everyone online can see me. He's an amazing tech person. When you try a case here in this courthouse and you're freaking out because things aren't going well, he comes in with a good sense of humor and calmly gets you going again. So I want to thank Tony. And with that, I'll turn it back over to Cynthia. Thank you, everyone.
Now let's get started with the program. And one small housekeeping item: if you want CLE credit and you're in the room, be sure that you sign in. If you have attended today without registering and you're a drop-in, there is a blank sheet of paper at the end that you can fill out all the information. So fear not, you'll still get CLE. So with that, I would like to bring up fellow board member on the NJCHS and immediate past president of the M. Margaret McKeown Federal Bar Association, who serves as our moderator today, Robert Felnnaugh.
What is an honor to have both of you here. You know, I asked Judge Rawlinson kind of what the weather was like down there, and she said, "Oh, it's okay, it's 76." So I was kind of hoping that you'd bring a little bit of it up here. We'll see what we can do. I didn't give you bios. We didn't give you bios. The reason we didn't do that is because this whole thing is a bio. I assume that you know how to use Google, and we're in Seattle, use Bing. But if you're not, what we're going to do is go through and just have a discussion. Black history and the oral tradition is so important. And I think back real quick to the days where my dad had 6 brothers and sisters. My grandmother had 18 or 19 brothers and sisters. So we would get together, we have an amazing dinner, we have all kinds of meat, collard greens, a pig, and everything else. And then we'd have awesome desserts. But the show was at the end. At the end, we'd clear the food out. And we'd have card tables, and our parents and family would play cards. They played whist, and they played dominoes. And for us that were a little younger, but still, well, I was an adult at the time, but the younger adults, they gather around. We didn't care who won. We wanted to hear the stories. And my dad had a joke. If you're listening, and if you grin, you're in, which means you don't say anything if you're outside that table. But that's how you learned what your dad used to do, which he wouldn't tell you. You learned about crazy Uncle John and what he did, what you weren't supposed to know. Everything was amazing. So what we're going to do is have a little of that here, where we're just going to have a discussion. But what's different than the Black tradition is we're going to allow you as we go to ask questions. This is not the Grammys. Which means what we don't want is a long 5-minute question from you, which is really a story. I can give it the microphone, I can take it away. So with that, let's start. For us Seattleites, all of us who are native Seattleites understand busing, what busing was like. But Judge Rawlinson, you can talk about something a little different. You can talk about segregation. Tell us what it was like to have segregation in your community.
Yes, but first let me just say I'm so happy to be here. And thank you so much for inviting me. Thank you to the Margaret McKeown, FBA, my esteemed and amazing colleague, and to the Ninth Circuit Judicial Historical Society, which puts on great programming. They've done an oral history of me, and they let me know I was getting old. So I'm going to do some quick oral history, you know, I'm getting old. And I appreciate those remarks from Judge Lynn and ChatGPT. Is human, agrees with ChatGPT on this subject, that I think that our history is so important as context. And the reason I tell my life experience about segregation is that many of you in this room and many people alive today don't have that context. And so I don't want to take all the time, but I just want to set the stage for my life experience and how that relates to what's happening today. I grew up in a small town in North Carolina. The name of it is Kannapolis, North Carolina. And that's a Greek word for city of looms. And in my hometown, we had one industry, and that was a cotton factory. And they made all the sheets, all the towels, all of the cloth materials, cotton that went out throughout the nation. It was a huge operation, 24 hours a day. And it was owned by one family there. And the concept of that city was to build a mill town. And they built the schools, they built the hospital, they built the homes for the workers to live in, the YMCA, everything was owned by this family. And it was strictly segregated by law. It's hard to imagine for many of you in this room living in a place where there were separate water fountains, there were separate churches, there were separate schools, there were separate swimming pools, there were separate movie theaters. African Americans could not go into a restaurant to eat. I never went out to eat when I was growing up because we weren't allowed to go into the restaurants. And I remember there was this one taxi stand that had a kitchen in it. And they reportedly had the best hamburgers and hot dogs in the city. And my father forbade us from going there because African Americans had to go to the back door to order. We couldn't go into the front door. We had to go to the back door to order. And after they had completed all of the orders for their white customers, they would hand the African Americans their food out the back door. And my father threatened the worst whipping of our lives if we ever went there. He said, if you want to get something from there, tell me, I'll go get it. So he wanted to spare us the indignity of having to go there and have food handed out the back door to us. So I was born in 1952. 2 years after, in 1954, Brown versus Board of Education came down. Before that time, as I said, the schools were thoroughly segregated. We had one school for all African American students, grades 1 through 12. And as you can imagine, those schools, our school was greatly inferior to the other schools in terms of our materials. I never received a new school book while I was in that school. We always got the school books that had been deemed unfit for the other schools, and those were the ones we got. We never got new band instruments. We had no scientific equipment. But what we did have was dedicated teachers. Those teachers were dedicated to teaching us and helping us to have a better life than they had. And that was the beauty of going to a segregated school. A lot of people have the impression that those who attended segregated schools got an inferior education in terms of academics. Our schools were inferior in terms of facilities and in terms of materials, but the spirit of the teachers and the way they gave of themselves to the students was without parallel. And that was because we were all one community. All of us were required to live together. So the teachers went to church with us, they were our neighbors, and they were invested in us. So in 1967, in all deliberate speed, a decision was made to integrate the high schools. Now, ideally, what would have happened would have been that some white students would have been required to go to the black school, and some black students would have been required to go to the white school. But of course, the powers that be were not going to send white students to the school that was admittedly inferior in terms of materials and in terms of facilities. So the plan was to have the African American students en masse go to the previously all white schools. So at the beginning of my 10th grade year, let me back up for a moment. The school board sought volunteers from the African American community to go to the white schools, but there were not enough willing to go to truly integrate the schools. Frankly, the white students didn't want us in their school, and we didn't want them. So it was not a good situation. But in order to comply with the law, in 1967, the school board closed the African American school, and we all had to go to white school. And it was a traumatic experience for us, for all of us, for the white students and the black students, because remember that prior to that, we had never socialized. And so you have these teenagers who are already trying to figure out who they are, and then we're thrown into this volatile mix of having to take the responsibility of desegregating the school. And I don't think much planning went into it, because it just seemed that all of the black students were disenfranchised. We didn't have any cheerleaders. We didn't have any female students on the basketball teams, the softball teams. So they were willing to take the athletes. So the football players, the basketball players, all of them were welcome with open arms. Not so much for the rest of us who were there. And it was in retrospect, I imagine that it would have gone better if there had been some attempt for us to learn each other's histories, learn each other's cultures before we were thrown into this mix where we had all of these stereotypes that we had learned from our parents and our grandparents, and all of those were brought into the mix when we went into the schools. All of the homecoming dances were canceled, prom was canceled, but there would be no race mixing. And in that scenario, there was little chance for us to really come together as a community of students. It took a few years for things to be ironed out. And I remember I was academically talented. And I was one of the few people that were in college courses, from African Americans that were in college courses. But I remember in the 10th grade in my geometry class, we were assigned, I was the only African American there, and we were assigned problems to work out together. And no one would agree to work with me. So I ended up having to do twice as much work, learned a lot more though, and it stood me in good stead. And I was talking about the factory that all of us worked in, most people worked in. And I remember my senior year, there were 4 of us who were vying to be the top in the class. 3 were white, and there was me. So we went to the office and we sat around and we did the GPAs, and it came down to fractions of a percentage of points. And we ended up with a valedictorian who was a young man, salutatorians 2 young women, and then me. So I was 4th in my class. And I'm telling you that because my guidance counselor told me that I would make a very good maid. I dressed nicely, I talked nicely, and I was smart. So that was her vision of what my life should look like. And so I'm saying that in the context of DEI. So if there were people who thought like my high school counselor who were doing the hiring, absent a requirement to extend the hiring pool, would that person hire someone who looked like me? That's the reason we had to have some outreach efforts. And I hasten to say that DEI does not mean a lack of merit. That's a false narrative, because I was worthy to be hired. I went to the mill to get a job after school. And I asked the human resources person if I could work in the office. And he brought somebody in and said, she wants to work in the office. And they both just burst into laughter. And the job they gave me was a sweeper. And what that means is in the mill, we made cotton products. And so the offshoot of it was cotton, knee high. And my job was to sweep the factory of all of the cotton from one end of the big room to the next. I would sweep the cotton, get to the end of the room, look back, and look like snow again. So that was the job they gave me instead of giving me an office job, even though I was number 4 in my class. And that can be very discouraging, or it can be very encouraging. And to me, it motivated me that I was not going to live my life in that factory. Decent living, and people raised their families there, but it motivated me to know that I needed a change. And so segregation was an impetus for me. It was my life, it's my lived experience, and no one can take that away because I lived it, and it's my story, and we can't take it away by pretending it didn't exist. As ChatGPT says, we need to learn from those experiences, grow from those experiences, and make changes that make all of us feel that we can reach our highest potential.
You know, that was a great answer. I'm looking through.
It was a little long, but
I'll just say this. I'm looking through my paper. Did she cover that? Check. She covered that? Check. And she covered that? Check. But that was an amazing answer. How do you think personally you were able to overcome segregation? Because many didn't, but you did. So what do you think the difference was?
I think there are 2 answers to that. The first is my parents. My parents were determined that we were going to get an education and do better than they did. My father had a high school education. My mother only went to the 8th grade. And she knew the value of education, and she was strict. I mean, we had to have straight A's. If we came home with a B, there was some explaining to do. So she was much more motivated. And my father was, he read all the time. And he was a brilliant man. But because of the times, he wasn't able to realize his potential. And I remember my dad, you could give him a list of numbers, and I would write up a list of 10 numbers and add them up. And I would tell my dad, and he would do like this for a few seconds, and he would come up with the answer every single time. He was a genius. And so he inspired me by reading and by just watching his mind work, that I had the capability of doing more than people thought I could. And the second thing is I went to an HBCU, historically Black college and university. And there I was able to heal, because I didn't have to worry about whether or not the grades I got were because of my race, or whether someone was really sabotaging my success. And so I was kind of in a cocoon for those 4 years, and I was able to learn about my heritage, take pride in my heritage, and be reassured that I can succeed in any endeavor that I want to take.
You know, it's interesting that you bring up that idea, because I was going to ask you. I was looking through your bio, and it talks about how you went to segregated schools. And then later on, you chose to go to North Carolina A&T, which is a historical Black college, which again, not many whites are going. Is that why you chose to go to that school?
Well, back then, not many whites were going there. That's not true anymore.
Right.
It's very well segregated.
Right.
I went there. I had a sister a year ahead of me who was going there. And so I knew the type of experience she was having was a good academic experience and a good social experience. And at that time, I felt I had some psychic wounds that needed to be healed. Now, I didn't mind going to a segregated school. I loved going to the segregated school because all of my friends were there. The teachers cared about us, and it was a positive experience, even though the materials we had were inferior. I got an excellent education, at the segregated school, and it showed when I went to the integrated school because I was still a top student. So going to a segregated school was not a negative for me. And going to the HBCU was a continuation of the positive feelings I had when I was going to the segregated school initially as a child.
Thank you. Judge Jones, I know segregation affected you in some way. Why don't you explain?
It did. First of all, that was,
Yeah.
to be honest, I feel like I should just go sit in the audience and let you just run the show. I wish I could say I was eye candy just to be up here, but that ain't the case either. So I'm just happy to be here and to be able to share in this moment with all of you. I grew up in Seattle, right around the corner from Garfield High School on 22nd and Jefferson. And last of 8 kids, mother was a maid and father was a carpenter. Our roots go back to Chicago. And at that time, my dad was a finished carpenter. He'd worked on Ida B. Wells' home for 13 months. And she had resources back then, and she had the capacity to hire the very best to work on her home. That was the quality work that my dad was performing for 13 months in her home. When he had finished that opportunity, the next one was a large government contract that was to the tune of about $6 million. And my dad was sent to this facility to be one of the carpenters. So my dad shows up, he has his toolbox, he has his lunch pail, and he walks up, the white plant manager comes out and he says, "You need to go home. You're not gonna work." He said, "We don't tolerate Negroes working along white workers." And he said, "The best that I can do for you is you can come in after the day's over and you can clean up, but you're not gonna work here as a carpenter." So my dad takes us back to the union. He takes it also to the Urban League, and I actually have a picture in my office of an article that was written about this confrontation about what Jim Crow denied carpenter opportunity to work on this government contract. And so as a result, my dad took on other employment because, 5 kids in Chicago, the south side of Chicago, you had to earn money. And the way he earned money was working on gangsters' homes. Now, when we were kids, we used to watch a show on TV called The Untouchables. And my dad would look at some of these gangsters and he'd say, "He wasn't that kind of person." How the hell you know? But it was just a fascinating experience. It was just his version. But as other family would come from Chicago, they would talk about the experience. And my brother said that when my dad would go and get his paycheck from the gangsters, it was a building called the Rosenwald Building. And there would be men standing in front of this building with Thompson submachine guns, the kind with the roll on the bottom. And they were the security. When they would go in with my father to get his cash payment, there was a lot of African-American men just standing around waiting to get paid. And all the people that had the money were white. They had the visors. They said it looked just like an old movie. And so that's how my dad was able to survive. And that's how many of the Black tradesmen were able to survive. And that was the only way to survive. Well, after a long period of this, my dad decided this isn't the way to keep our family alive. And so an opportunity was over at Bremerton Naval Shipyards. And we were talking yesterday, and Robert has family that went to the naval shipyards as well, because that was a migration opportunity coming to the Northwest to be able to find regular employment to take care of your family. And so that was the experience. It was over in Sinclair Heights in the projects. And Malcolm Gladwell wrote a book called The Tipping Point. It's been out a number of years. In that book, it talks about how a single experience can change the course of history and life. Now, while my brothers over, they brought that South Side of Chicago mentality and decided they wanted to go get some dessert. So they broke into the armory, first felony. They broke into the armory to go get some dessert, specifically meringue pie and ice cream. While they were in there breaking in that room enjoying the desserts, another brother commits the second felony. He breaks in another part of the armory. And when he goes in, there's an upright old piano. And he'd never touched the piano before, didn't have access to one. And he went over there, and the way he tells it, as soon as he put both hands on the piano and started banging, he said something went through his veins and went through his body And it was like God telling him, this is how you will spend the rest of your life making your living. My brother's Quincy Jones. So, but for that racism, segregation, and discrimination, our family could have stayed in Chicago. And I can't imagine me growing up in the South Side of Chicago, knowing what my brothers were doing in the South Side of Chicago. I'd have easily been on the other side of the bench a lot, as opposed to having the opportunity to be a judge on this side. So I was very thankful for the family having an opportunity, but not to have that negative course of experience, to have to fight discrimination and fight just to get a decent meal on the table.
Thank you. Thank you. So then, yeah, we're going to be doing this a while, but yes. So who were your heroes? You're talking about how you could have been on the other side of the aisle. Who were the people that you looked up to pre-law school?
I'd say pre-law school, it was mostly my dad, because I'd see him leave in the morning and he would come back home and he'd put plastic sheets on his old Mercury, and he'd come home and he was just so dirty, and I'd run up to him because I was so happy to see him. And he'd look down and he'd say, boy, he said, whatever you do, you don't want to do this. He said, you get your education and you won't have to work and you won't have to live like this. He was my hero. I'd go on the construction sites with him. He'd give me some wood and some nails and give me something to do. Plus we couldn't afford to pay childcare. And that was my existence. So he was clearly the hero in the neighborhood. My mother was a maid, and she would come home sometimes totally frustrated over the names that she would be called, the racial epithets, how she would be working in white people's homes to just, earn a living. And she would come home and sometimes in tears over the fact that how hard she'd worked to do something special, and at the end of the day, just to be called a nigger. And you can't imagine what that breakdown looks like for a mother and father to come home and work all day, but they're doing it for one reason, because they're feeding their kids and their family. So clearly for me, the heroes were parents. Other heroes I saw were the folks that were in the construction and trades. Seattle Central Community College, when they were doing buildings, Seattle Central contractors used to come up and meet at an organization I worked at. They would come up, talk about going to a construction site to try and integrate, and people wouldn't let the African-American contractors work. And then riots would break out. And I remember going with them, and I remember being as far back as I could, because I saw people coming out there with their heads split open, bleeding, and beaten up, just because they were trying to get jobs. So when I saw people that were on the front lines, it wasn't a question of the war front lines. It was the front lines in our neighborhood, in our community, that were fighting for opportunities for other people, not just for themselves. So we talk about the war on racism. They lived in the war of racism, and I saw the brutality that they suffered and what they had to do to try and just make ends meet. Those are heroes in my neighborhood.
And that's an amazing story. The heroes that we had and who we saw. I know my father, his person that he looked up to was his grandfather. He wanted to be a truck driver like my grandfather. My grandfather crashed the trucks. So my dad decided to become a dentist instead. But in his mindset, he wanted to be a truck driver, and he looked up to him because my grandfather was amazing. So I think that's an amazing story, how we look up to the people who are close to us. Judge Rawlinson, how about you?
Yes, my heroine growing up was the librarian for the segregated school that I went to, Miss Bryant. And she never married. She passed away in 2024 at 100 years old. The children at the school were her children. And she had a small library because, of course, in the segregated school, we didn't have a lot of books. But in the summertime, they would open the school up as a resource for the children to come play games, to read. And I opted to read. And I read through every book she had in the library. And after I became an adult, I found out that she was going to the white library begging for books for me to have to read after I had read all of the books there. She truly cared so much about us as students. She dedicated her life to instilling a love of reading in us and expanding our knowledge beyond what we learn in the classroom.
Thank you. Why did you choose to go to law school, Judge Rawlinson?
Going to law school was not my goal in life.
Okay.
I wanted to be a teacher. And in fact, the first job I had after college, excuse me, was being a preschool teacher. And it was so gratifying for me because I was a preschool teacher in a very impoverished area of Greensboro, which is where I went to college. And it was, I think for the first time, the children, 3 and 4-year-olds were being challenged to accomplish academic tasks because I learned to read at a very young age. And so I knew they could as well. And I started introducing them to phonics and sight reading at 3 and 4 years old. And the director of the school came in because she couldn't believe that these 3 and 4-year-olds were reading sight words and doing phonics. And so it was so gratifying to me. I couldn't pay my rent. So I had to do something else. And so I got a job at the Corps of Engineers in Wilmington, North Carolina in human resources. And I worked there for 2 years. And my boyfriend, who later became my husband, his best friend was going to law school at the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill. And we went down there to visit him. And he was talking about all these amazing things he was learning about what you can do if somebody evicts you from your apartment, or you have a car accident, or somebody fires you from your job. Concepts I had never heard about, that you have a right to sue people in court. And I said, that sounds so fascinating to my husband. And I said, I think I want to go. No, I said, let's go to law school. That's what I told my boyfriend. He goes, okay, you go first. And then I'll go later. Of course, he never went. But, and so I just took the LSAT. I mean, I took it blind. I didn't study. I didn't know that you're supposed to get these courses and all of that. I just took it. And fortunately, I did really well on it. I got an offer from University of North Carolina, Chapel Hill. But my husband was in ROTC. And he got stationed in California, in Sacramento. I had never been west of the Mississippi. I had no idea of any law school in California. We didn't have the internet in those days. So I went to the library, looked at the almanac to see what schools were in Sacramento. And the only one I saw was University of Pacific. So I applied to University of Pacific, and this is a crazy story, but it's true. I was the recruiter for the Army Corps of Engineers. So I would go back to my alma mater, A&T, which has an amazing engineering school to recruit engineers. I was sitting at my recruitment table. Right next to me was a judge from California from McGeorge Law School. He went back to McGeorge, got me a full scholarship. I went there sight unseen and loved it. And the rest is history.
The rest is it. Now that's amazing history. All right. Judge Jones, how about you?
I don't have a story like that. What I do share is my original goal was to be a teacher, an educator, and it was high school. But the problem was Seattle School District was always going on strike. And the number of strikes were so frequent and the income stream was so infrequent. I had been broke my entire life, and I didn't want to go into the next phase of my life continuing to be broke. And so that's the reason I started looking at the possibilities of going to law school. The other thing is I'd taken a few law courses in undergraduate, and then there were very few kids in our neighborhood who had the opportunity to go to school. I'm just talking about college, let alone going to law school. And so my mom let everybody in the neighborhood know that her son was a lawyer. I said, Mom, I'm in college. I'm taking a couple law classes. People were asking me to write letters when their light was getting shut off. People were asking me to just for different types of legal advice. And my father was always a caretaker in the community, not for pay, but he was always helping somebody at their home, building things or putting things together or just helping somebody. And my mom, our home was always one where even though we already had 10 people in the house and I was young at the time, there was always extra food for everybody else. And so both of them worked hard, both of them gave opportunities to help other people. And I had enough negative experiences in my life that I wanted to do something that whatever it was, I was helping other people. And so law looked like the opportunity that if nobody else liked me, if nobody else liked the type of law that I practiced, that I could just put a sign up that said Richard Jones, attorney at law. And one of my other brothers knew what my thought process was, and he had a wooden shingle that says Richard Jones. I still have my garage now. It says Richard Jones, attorney at law, because I always believed no matter what happens in life, no matter how somebody tries to dog me, and they did later, I could still practice with my name, my reputation, based on my skill set, not predicated on anybody else's involvement in the decisions I made, how to make my life.
Oh, thank you. Thank you. So you're both lawyers now, thinking back. Who were your mentors, Judge Jones?
I'd say, without question, the Lauren Miller Bar Association were my mentors. When I first started law school, it was the Lem Howells, it was Charles E. Smith, it was the Gary Gayton, it was the Phil Burton, it was Carl Maxey. I would go to their homes because we didn't have a formal place to meet. And we would sit around a table, we'd sit in the living room, and they would tell stories about what the practice of law was all about. They would talk to me about how discriminatory and what's racist thing the judges could get away with in the courtroom. They would give us encouragement to say, we formed the Lauren Miller Law Club because the white bar associations wouldn't necessarily include us or let us participate. And that was powerful because I felt like I had a legal family that would always be there to support me. When I was taking the bar, in terms of being able to go over to Lem Howell's office to work with him, to practice and study with the bar. With Gary Gayton, in terms of representing ball players out at the University of Washington who were being discriminated against in terms of how they were being recruited. I saw Carl Maxey in terms of from Eastern Washington. And Carl was a dynamic figure. I mean, he was an imposing figure. When Carl walked into the courtroom, Bob Westinghouse here, Carl, you probably remember Carl Maxey coming to the court. Big white mane, big, tall, strong black man. And he didn't take mess from anybody. And he said when son passed, said at his funeral, the reason my father believed that a lot of people would come to his funeral is not because they wanted to respect him, but they just wanted to make sure that he was dead.
That's cold.
It's cold, but that was the way he believed that people perceived him. So Lauren Miller to me was my community. That was my support base. And that was the people that supported me. And it was unquestionable support there all the way through and in my early years of practice. And Judge Johnson has been like a surrogate father. And there's never a move I ever made in my entire career without consulting or checking in with Judge Johnson. And if I didn't check in with him, he'd call me up and say, Jones, what's going on? That's what mentorship was all about.
Judge Rawlinson, how about you?
Well, I have a story.
Okay, that's what we're here for. That's good.
So before I was admitted to practice law in the state of Nevada, there had never been an African-American woman admitted to practice in the state of Nevada. So another African-American woman and I were the first two women admitted to practice law in the state of Nevada. So understandably, people were not used to seeing African-American women coming into the courtroom. I was often mistaken for the defendant, even though I was dressed professionally. And there was a visiting judge there once from one of the northern counties in Nevada. And I had a hearing before him. And after the hearing, the law clerk called me. And he said, you're not going to believe what that judge said about you. I said, did he say I did an amazing job? He said, no. He said, who was that uppity colored girl that was in here? So I had a rude introduction into the legal world. I was a law clerk for one of the well-known attorneys in Las Vegas before I passed the bar. And I honestly think he did not think I was going to pass the bar. Because when I passed the bar, he had two law clerks. One was a young white man and me. And we did the same work. He would leave us work to do. We would do it over the weekend and leave it for him. And he would file almost unchanged the pleadings that I did for him. So when I passed the bar, he offered the young man a position. And I went in to him and I said, am I going to be able to work here now that I passed the bar? He said, yes, I can hire you, but there are 2 conditions. And I said, okay, what are they? He said, I can only pay you $5 an hour and you won't have an office. You have to work in the library. That was an offer I could refuse, and I did refuse. His partner felt so badly about it that he came to me afterward and said, I'm on the board of directors for legal services, and they have a position open. Why don't you apply for it? And I'll put in a word for you. And I did that. I got the job at Legal Services. And on the board of Legal Services was this young African-American man. And he came to me and said, I work in the DA's office and we need more African-Americans working there. He said, if I talk to, at the time that the DA was a man who later became the governor, if I talk to him and he offers you the job, will you take it? I said, of course I will. I'll take it. And so he became my mentor. He shepherded me through the process to get in the DA's office. And if I had any questions or anything, I would run them by him so I wouldn't look like I was incompetent when I did something. His name is Booker Evans, and he's still practicing law, and he was an amazing mentor to me.
Wow. Thank you. You know, when you talk about that issue of being a DA, I was looking at both of your backgrounds, and I see John Carpenter, Colin, and other defense attorneys, Offenbecker. And I was kind of wondering, Black people went through Black hardship.
Mhm.
Judge Rawlinson, why did you choose to be a prosecutor, prosecuting everyone, including Black people, versus other kind of jobs?
I have a story.
Okay. I'm with it.
I have a story for
I'm with
everything.
it.
So when I went to law school,
Yeah.
I really wanted to be a public defender. That was my dream job. I wanted to be a public defender. Unfortunately, in Las Vegas at that time, the public defender's office only hired one African-American at a time. And so when I got there, the one African-American slot was filled. And then Booker Evans asked me if I would take the job as a DA if he got me an interview. And he asked me that question because being an African-American prosecutor at that time was very problematic. The community was not receptive to African-American prosecutors. They called us sellouts. They called us persecutors, and it was not well received. But what I would tell them is that you want somebody like me in the prosecutor's office. You could be my brother, you could be my uncle. I see you. My family has similar experiences to yours. So the prosecutor is the most powerful person in the process. The prosecutor gets to decide what charges are brought, what you get to plead to. He controls your life in the criminal justice system to a large degree, even before you get to the judge. So you want somebody like me there. And so I gradually, got credibility in the community with being a prosecutor. And I ascended to the point where I was the assistant DA, and I was able to do outreach to get more diversity in the office so that all of the burden wasn't on the one or two. They didn't become the lightning rod for the community, so to speak. And so I made it a point to try to diversify in terms of gender, schools, and ethnicity for the DA's office. And I think that it made a difference in terms of the acceptance of African-American prosecutors.
And you were there for how many years?
17.
Yeah,
Mhm.
yeah. And Judge Jones, you grew up in the Central District. So how was it for you?
One thing I'd like to put a pause button. We're sharing common experiences. And there's so much overlap that the two of us have. I hope you don't walk out of this room and think that we're anomalies, that they had a tough time, or she had a tough time, or he had a tough time as a Black person coming up in the practice of where we grew up. I can assure you that you go to so many other African Americans, our age bracket, and a whole lot younger, and you give them an opportunity, they could go on with common experience after common experience. I used to sit in the Lauren Miller Bar meetings as a young lawyer and listen to the stories of what they experienced. And I was saying, maybe I should have gone to medical school. This is the ass kicking I'm going to get if I practice law. And the way I became a prosecutor was actually a negative experience. I was working at the U.S. Attorney's Office for 2 years as the law clerk. And one of the biggest firms in Seattle, not Bogle and Gates, because I was hired and worked there with Judge Kuhnhauer many years later, but one of the biggest firms in the city called me up and said, we've heard about you and we'd like to know if you'd be considering our firm and apply. So I said, yeah. So I put in an application, went through the process, I went through all the interviews. And so then I got what was supposed to be the lunch meeting. Stan Pitkin, who was a U.S. attorney at the time, came down to the law clerk's office, and there's 4 of us. And he came up, we're not supposed to touch people. He came up doing that coach thing, rubbing you on your shoulder, saying, Jones, you got great glowing recommendations from everybody in the office. He said, bring it home. He said, well, you're going to get a job. He said, it's going to be a fabulous opportunity for you and a growing opportunity for you. So let me know how experience goes. So I run down to Rosalini's 410 to have lunch because I had gone through the whole process and I was ready to go. And I walk in, I'd heard these stories about champagne, a bunch of people around the table and all the excitement and the whistles and bells. And I walk in and the hiring partner is sitting there by himself. He's got a glass of water in front of him and he's looking like this. And I said, uh-oh, it doesn't look good. And so I went right up to the table and I said, rather than go through an uncomfortable lunch, I think I can read good news than bad news. And I said, so why don't we talk about why I'm here as opposed to struggling through a difficult lunch? So I sat down and he said his words. He said, Richard, I've made a recommendation for you to be hired, but the senior partners in the firm aren't sure how our white clients are going to react to having a Black lawyer represent them. And he followed up, don't take it personal. And I felt like somebody had kicked me in the gut right then. And I was angry, I was frustrated, and I left there and I couldn't even go back to the office. What was I going to do? And run down to the U.S. Attorney's office and say, I didn't get the job because I'm Black. Like he could have respected that or even stood what that meant or why. How was I supposed to go back and talk to my fellow law students and say, I didn't get the job because I'm Black? And all of a sudden you've got everybody in the office saying, Jones didn't get the job because something must have come up in his background. Something must be wrong. Never associating that race could have been the reason why I didn't get the job. So what I did, having experienced that, I put my picture on my resume. Now, have any of you ever seen a resume with the photograph of an applicant? Put your hand up if you have. Okay. It's rare. I did it for one particular reason. You will know it's a Black man who applied for this job. And if you don't want it, there's a round object in your office that you can drop the resume in. Don't waste my time so that I don't have to go through this again. I left that office and I went right down to the King County Prosecutor's Office at the recommendation of Justice Charles E. Smith. And I was hired as a King County prosecutor. And so that was a negative reason why I got to the prosecutor's office. But I went for the same reason because Black folks, you'd much rather have me in that courtroom making decisions about the same things that you talked about, so that when you walked in and said issues about poverty, issues about strained family circumstances, issues about control or inability to control things in that environment, knowing where I came from, they knew that they'd have a sensitive ear. Now, it wasn't like I was cutting deals saying, you only killed 2 people? We good? It wasn't like that, but it was just the idea of a greater appreciation of sensitivity. And I can tell you that same experience carried over into judgeships. And I think it applies for both of us.
Actually, for both of them, give a round of applause. So Judge Jones, moving into becoming a judge, what inspired you?
Again, wasn't a positive thing. I served on the King County Bar Association Judicial Evaluation Committee for 4 years. And Lem Howlett suggested, he said, we need to have representation of who's becoming our judges. So I did that for 4 years. And I started seeing some of the yo-yos coming through there applying to be judge. And I said, hell, if they think they can be a judge, I know I can do this. And so I had completed all the evaluations, and I wasn't going to file against somebody because that was the kiss of death against a sitting judge. And then a Black woman in the community, Freddie Mae Gaucher, who was like the godmother in the community, She called me up. She said, Richard, you applying for a job for Judge Sullivan's position? He just died. And I said, I know, Freddie, man, today's his funeral. Her words, look, fool, if you don't apply, hundreds of other people are going to probably apply for the job, send it in. That was on Tuesday. I sent it in. Wednesday, I got a call from the governor's office. Thursday, I was interviewed by the governor's office. Friday, at about 11:40, I was appointed a King County Superior Court judge. Filing started that following Monday. I quit my job Sunday night. Monday morning, I was sworn as a King County Superior Court judge. I had to get a campaign committee together, and I got my ass kicked for the next 2 months in the campaign. So it was fast. I don't encourage that for anybody to do, but it was a fast, lightning speed opportunity to become a judge and learning the process and see how much support came because of the work that I'd done with people in the community.
So then how did you choose then to move on to becoming a U.S. District Court judge?
Opportunity. There was an open position. Judge Lasnik told me when I first talked to him about it, and he said, Jones, he said, the planets all have to be lined up to become a federal judge. And he encouraged me to apply. I talked to Judge Tanner, talked to Judge Kuno, I believe, as well, and some other folks about the opportunity. And they said, don't be afraid. If you don't put your name in, you're not going to get the opportunity. And so I took advantage of it.
Judge Rawlinson,
I
how
have a
about you?
story.
Okay, good, good.
I've never been a state court judge. So my two appointments were both federal appointments. Many of you may not remember now, but my senator was Senator Harry Reid. He was a powerhouse in the Senate. And I didn't have to go through any committee or anything. Senator Reid called me one day, and if anybody knew Senator Reid, he was not a person to make small talk. So he would call, and when the purpose of the call was over, he'd hang up. So he called me and he goes, can you be at my office at 4 o'clock tomorrow? And I said, yes, what? Click. So he hung up the phone. So I went over there the next day and he said, how would you like to be a federal judge? I had never envisioned being a judge because I was fairly young at that time. I was like 40, 46. And I thought maybe at the end of my career, I might want to be a judge. But Senator Reid was a visionary. There had never been a woman as an Article III judge in Nevada, and there had never been a person of color in 1998 in Nevada. And so Senator Reid chose me to break both those barriers. And he gave me a 2-question interview. And when I asked people if they can think of the questions he gave me, no one has ever gotten the answer right. The first question was, have you ever cheated on your husband? That was the first question. Second question was, have you ever used marijuana? That was my 2-question interview before I was recommended for nomination by Senator Reid. And then Senator Reid said, I don't have a committee. I consult with myself and then I do the recommendation. So that's what he did with me. He consulted with himself, asked me those 2 questions, and then he recommended me to the president and the Senate for confirmation. Judge Lasnik and I were talking about my confirmation hearing. So I had a strategy for my confirmation hearing. So I have an amazing family. I'm not bragging, it's just true. And so at the time when I went for my confirmation hearing, I had a daughter in college, a daughter in high school, and my son was in elementary school. And then I took with me my mother-in-law, my husband's brother, and my husband's brother's 2 children, one of whom was in a Boy Scout uniform. So we got there, I introduced all of the kids. They were all straight A students. I was worried about Senator Orrin Hatch from Utah, but my strategy paid off because Senator Hatch came and said, that's quite a clan you have there, he said. And after that, it was smooth sailing for me. So it was quite an experience, one of the most frightening things I've ever done. But Senator Reid had a vision, and he told me it was bigger than me because I was not sure that I really wanted to go through that process. But he persuaded me that I was the person that he had selected to make those inroads, and I'm really glad I did.
Good, sure.
You know, one of the differences, different things happen, I think, when you're a Black candidate going through the process than I think the white candidates. You say, well, that's kind of a racist statement. Well, let me give you an example. The only people that I had go to my confirmation hearings were my wife, my two sisters, and their husbands. It was a small group. And then my kids go, didn't have anybody else go. There are a number of African Americans that were large supporters on national impact type individuals that wanted to be there. And each one of them called and said, Richard, if I show up and they see me in the room, the only person that's up for consideration that's African American is you. There's a better chance that, not because of anything that you'll say, but me being present for you and some of these other folks being present for you could be and have an adverse impact on your opportunity to be confirmed. So they were apologizing for not being able to have an opportunity to be present for that hearing or to provide support. But the one thing I can say is, after it was all over, the person that was there that hosted the dinner was Justice Thurgood Marshall's wife. And we had dinner at her home. I mean, Mrs. Marshall put it out like you could not, I mean, true Washington, D.C. style. And an amazing woman, amazing friend.
I didn't have that kind of reception.
You had too many people to feed. You brought too many people.
Keep it small.
That's right. All right. How do we say this? I was not going to ask about DEI, but Judge Rawlinson, I think you opened the door. I think that's what we call it. So here's my question, which I kind of wrote last year, but it makes a little more of a difference this year. How can the legal system better promote diversity and inclusion, especially in this day and age?
Well, that's something I've done my entire career, because almost invariably, wherever I've been the first and only, and that it's lonely. And so I wanted to bring other people in for two reasons. One, so I wouldn't have the spotlight on me as much. And secondly, because these are amazing opportunities that should be shared. And so that's been kind of my philosophy my entire career, is to make sure that I make the opportunity available for a wide network of people of all races, all ethnicities, for the male and female. And so that's just been I just think we're stronger when we are representative of our entire community. And I think that, you know, DEI has been mischaracterized because all it is making sure that opportunities are available to all qualified people and not stemming the pool. And so I am committed to diversity. I'm committed to equity, and I'm committed to inclusion. I don't see it as three dirty words. And I think we're stronger for it. And I think as a legal community, rather than talking about it, we should just be about it. We don't have to debate anyone. We don't have to justify the existence of it. Just do it.
So with the presidential mandates, executive orders, and things that we're hearing, there are Black students of, well, all races. What would you tell them? How would you encourage them when they're hearing what their president's saying today?
I would tell them to just keep applying and keep making sure that they are being considered on their merit. Fortunately, the federal courts are not within those mandates. And so we're free to continue business as usual. And so I think that maybe the law students may want to pivot their focus to places where DEI hasn't been hampered until all of this is hammered out and we get a clear picture of where we're going. The other thing is, you don't have to use those words to perform the function. And so sometimes people get caught up on what the title of the program is. And so I would just tell the students to keep doing what they're doing, keep striving to be the best they can be in all circumstances. Put yourselves out there for any opportunity that you want, and don't worry about how it's going to be labeled.
Great. Judge Jones.
I talked to some kids the other day, and we were talking about this issue. And the frightening thing for me was, one of them said, "It makes me feel like I'm not important." And then we had the conversation about don't be afraid. and the whole question of fear in terms of that somebody else can't tell you that you're not important. I said, you define who you are and what your capacity is at all times. Then I told them stories about struggles and challenges that I have. And they said, well, that was you, but I don't even know where to get started. And so my message out to the lawyers is, what programs or things can you do that are creating pipeline opportunities for the young kids? We have a youth law forum here, and Judge Lynn and I have run a program to the Just the Beginning Foundation. You'll be hearing more about this as it goes on. We hosted one last year. We had 65 students, mostly students of color, that came to this program, to this courthouse. They spent a day at both universities, CLU, University of Washington, at a private firm, half a day of experience here. We're going to do it again this year. And these kids are just buzzed, they're excited. And as we did a mock trial, I had a kid sitting next to me at a youth law firm, young African-American woman, and she looked up and I said, you nervous? And she said, this road feels pretty good.
Getting comfortable.
Then she said, I can do this.
Yeah.
And I said, you're absolutely right. And what we do at the end of that program is we give the kids an opportunity to get up on the bench and hold the gavel and take a picture on the bench. Because I want these high school kids to walk out that door with a visual image. It's not a football card, it's not a basketball card. It's a picture of you having the opportunity to become a judge. I'm not saying that that's not what you want to do if you want a lawyer, because there's a whole bunch of positions, but to give them that mental image and look around and see other people of different experiences, different ethnicities in that same courtroom to show you you can do it. And as you said, to hell with the labels. It's about opportunity and making it happen. If you've got a kid that's interested, bring that kid down to the courthouse. I'm happy to talk to those kids, happy to bring them in. So if they come up and walk into a courtroom and they see a Black man or a Black woman up on the bench, or a Native American or Asian or Hispanic, they see him up on the bench, as well as the white judges. I'm not dogging them. I'm just saying in general, they get a chance to walk into a courtroom and say, that person looks like me. Obama's got that famous picture of him with the little African-American kid rubbing his head saying, you got hair like me. It's all about being able to connect. And if you can connect to a child, you can inspire and create a dream. And whatever label you put on it, it can happen for that child. That's where the message has to go. And that's where our drive has to be.
Can I add something?
Please do.
This is nothing new. When I went to law school, one of my law school classmates asked me, are you here on affirmative action? Like it's a dirty word. And so I said, okay, let's take out our college transcripts and our LSATs, and then we'll see who's here on affirmative action. And then I proceeded to get the AmJur in civil procedure. So that all of that talk was over. So for the young lady who says she feels like she's not important, don't let other people's opinion of you shape what you think of yourself. You have to be confident in your own ability that you can do it, and not let other people gaslight you into thinking you don't belong. I hate the term imposter syndrome. To me, that is a way of making people feel inferior. And so when young people come to me and tell me that they have imposter syndrome, I'm like, why? You're here. You've made it. You obviously deserve to be here. So why would you adopt that narrative into your psyche to make yourself feel inferior? We have to stop doing that.
Well, let's talk as a Ninth Circuit judge. Did you ever have that time when you thought that other people treated you differently because of your race?
Well, I have had suspicions that perhaps there was a little more questioning of my product, and that's fine. Over time, I am confident in my ability to prove that I belong wherever I am. I don't profess to say that I'm the only person who can do this job, but I am one person who can. And that's the mindset we have to have. You don't have to be the absolute best person to do the job, as long as you are a person who can do the job. To me, it's counterproductive to say that person went to this school or that person had this experience, and to try to compare those to say who's best. As long as you're qualified, that's how I do with my law clerks. I don't necessarily accept the adage that only law students from certain schools can do the job of an appellate clerk. I think there are brilliant law students at every law school. Do I choose the absolute best ones? Maybe, and maybe not, but they're all qualified. They're all excellent at the job. And so getting into this debate about what's the absolute best, you're never going to be able to agree on that. And so as long as we're able to say, I'm qualified for this job, I can do it at a very high level, that's all we should be expecting.
Thank you. Judge Jones, how about you?
Only thing I'd add is, because your question was about the last treated differently.
Yeah.
And I'd say, as you grow up, and I think the same thing for you, it's what we call the black filter. Because things will happen to you and you'll say, is this going on because I'm black? We were in Hawaii with this real nice restaurant just a couple months back, for example. And we were in line, we had reservations, and two white couples came in after us, and one seated in the main part of the dining room. They came in after us. Then the next one comes up, they're seated in another part of the dining room, and then they take us to the very back, almost on the sidebar, closer to the kitchen. And then the filter pops up and said, is this because I'm black or what's going on? And then you don't want to mess up your meal by confronting somebody saying, you put me back here because I'm black. Now, I'll tell you the first Federal Bar Association dinner I attended as a federal judge. I was down waiting for my car to come up, and I was talking to Justice Gonzalez's wife because he went to go get the car. And I'm standing there and I got a black raincoat on. Another lawyer that I had litigated against for 1.5 years when I was at Bogle. I knew this guy well. He walks up with his valet ticket and taps me on the shoulder and says, I don't understand why my car's not here. And so I took his ticket and I put it in my pocket. And I kept talking to Justice Gonzalez's wife. And then the guy comes up and he turns around, he starts looking at me like this, still doesn't recognize me. He just sees a black person that's supposed to be parking cars. And so when my car came up, I took the ticket out of my pocket and I said, I think you have your roles reversed tonight. You should be doing this, not me. And walked away. And I came back and told all my colleagues who it was. So they would know what my first experience was like as a federal judge. So I'm not saying that there's, death by 1,000 cuts, but there's a lot of occurrences or things that happen in your career of being black. And I've gone through the driving while black, getting stopped being black. I've even been pulled out of my car for being black when I was a lot younger for no reason. And when you ask the cop why, you fit the description of a robbery suspect. With his hand on his gun, with his hand on my back, with me pushed up against the car in front of Dick's hamburger place on Broadway. So I'm saying as you go through life, not just as a judge, you constantly get these type of occurrences that happen in your life. And you have to worry about, make sure, not worry, but make sure that that race filter doesn't impact ever the decisions that you make. You're making a decision because it's the right thing to do, not because it's a payback opportunity.
Yeah. So looking more toward the future, and I'm looking at time, how do you see your legacy as a black judge impacting the future for other people?
Well, I hope it will inspire people. I hope it would inspire particularly the young kids to say, it's not like I'm ever going to be like Michael Jordan, but for these young kids to come in and see somebody and say, I want to be like that. I want to have an opportunity to be like that judge. I want to be a judge. I want to be a lawyer. I want to be able to get up in front of a group of people and be able to tell them exactly how I feel without hesitation or fear of retaliation for how I believe things or what I believe to be true. And so my goal, my legacy is all about supporting and making sure that young people know those opportunities exist. You just have to go and take them without fear.
Judge Rawlinson?
I totally agree. My goal is to inspire people who wouldn't ordinarily think they could be judges to be judges. If you had looked at me in high school or in college, you would have never picked me to be the person to be at the second highest court in the land. But it happened. And if it happened for me, it can happen for anyone. And that's the message that I give to young people. I hope to be an inspiration to you that you don't have to be wealthy. You don't have to be of a particular race. You don't have to be from a particular background. You don't have to go to a particular school in order to be successful, because people go to schools for all number of reasons. People can't help the circumstances they're born into. But despite that, strive to the highest levels, and whatever you want to do, you can achieve it.
So Judge Rawlinson, ending for both of you, I'll ask you both this. What's our call to action? Give me hope. Give us all hope. What can we all do now? Go ahead, Judge Rawlinson.
I say keep doing what we've been doing. I don't see any reason to stop any of the things we've been doing. And we need to just keep encouraging people to strive for success. Don't be discouraged. Don't give up. Don't be deterred. Keep going on.
And Judge Jones.
Ditto.
Ditto. And one more time, can you thank both of them since at the end? They did both a great job. It's so inspiring. We all learned so much. Thank you very much. Don't forget to do your evaluations. I'm told to tell you that. Make sure for you on the internet, wherever you are, to put in your name and put in your bar number. Is there anything else?
Questions? Were we supposed to have questions?
Well, if we have questions, we have limited time. We have, yes, 10 minutes, questions. Yes, go ahead, microphone. I will give you my microphone.
So actually, Tony Dutch let us know that the mics in the room with the new technology will pick up the voices.
Oh, okay, so then I can hear you. Okay, go ahead. You can just ask.
I would like to hear the same question from the other judge. I don't think.
Oh,
He wants you to.
they want a fuller answer.
He wants a fuller answer instead of ditto.
He said ditto, but this is your forum. You can do this. This is why he's here. So go ahead, Judge Jones.
I said ditto because it's my chance to affirm and tell you. There's really not much I can add other than the fact that you have to be committed to what the right thing to do is and speak the truth to power. And I don't have to define what power means or who that's supposed to include or not include, but just don't be afraid. If you've got litigation you think you should pursue because it's the right thing to do, don't let fear stop you. I always tell young people, you can't get an A if you're afraid to get an F. If you're afraid of failure, if you're afraid of flunking, and fear that this won't happen, change has never occurred by people not being willing to take a risk. And we're in times now that are challenging. We're in times where a lot of people are despairing, that are just upset, that are just depressed. My theme for 2025 has been staying the light. What do I have to do to stay positive in terms of what I do, stay in my lane and my capacity as a judge, and try and make sure that everything that comes out of my office, I've got 100% confidence. That's the right thing to do, not because somebody's telling me what I have to do. It's what I believe, it's what my history tells me to do, and it's what the law says.
All right. Wait there.
All right, to the both of you, this concept of DEI we keep hearing, to me, seems to be lacking a statement of merit, the current trend. So what do you feel about the absence of what seems to me, from what I'm perceiving, of voices that challenge current criticisms of DEI, which fail to recognize the merit we both spoke about?
I think that's a real failure of the people who are committed to diversity, of not really tackling the failures in the argument against diversity. And some of it may be fear, some of it may be hesitancy to go out on a limb alone, because sometimes it seems like you're out on a limb alone, and if you don't feel that there's anyone supporting you, it's difficult. And I hope Judge Felnnaugh doesn't mind me saying this, but when we were in San Diego last week, so many judges came up to Judge Cornell and told him how proud they were of him for doing what was right in the face of considerable pressure. And so, and he said that made him feel good, that people would support him. And so sometimes if you feel like you don't have that support, it's difficult to engage in a difficult conversation. But I think that we can do more to talk about the fact that DEI and merit are not mutually exclusive. And I think that point needs to be made more strongly.
If you think about it, just a year ago, DEI was in full force in effect. And now all of a sudden you flip the switch and every component, every opportunity, or every educational piece that's out there to educate. That's what DEI is all about, is education, not condemnation or minimization of somebody's skill set. It's a question of, we don't have to buy in to somebody else's perception that DEI equals incompetence. That DEI represents somebody who's not qualified for that position. There have been people who have been promoting, advocating, and educating others on DEI for years. And all of a sudden now we just say, okay, I accept it, it's not important anymore. I have to buy into that. If you buy into it, then that's a failure. I can't condemn you and say it's a failure for you because I don't think that you believe that. But if you buy into it, then that's a failure of your commitment to doing what the right thing is supposed to be done in the light of where folks are challenging DEI right now.
And it's really interesting to me that people are attacking DEI, but they don't see legacy admissions in the same light. That's a real hypocrisy to me, because if you say DEI is preferential impermissibly, then why isn't legacy admissions impermissibly preferential? So there's a little bit of a hypocrisy to me around this discussion as well.
Judge Canary, last question from you, sir.
One of my heroes, Judge Lasnik, said about Germany in the 1930s. Where were the lawyers? Where were the judges? I think it's people in this room and people like us who can make sure that we come out of this period with our heads held high.
Thank you. Let's end on that. Thank you, everyone.